Okay guys, go ahead and open your math book to page 663. But before we begin, let's just do a little bit of review of what kind of something that we are going to be using today. So we are going to be adding fractions. Now I know you might say, well, what does this have to do with decimals? We'll find out. But first, let's just practice adding fractions. We know that we can only add like fractions. So we have 1/4 plus 3/4. We know that like fractions have the same denominator, so we can do this addition problem. The steps to adding like fractions: step 1, add the numerators as you normally would. 1 plus 3 is 4. Step 2, the denominator stays the same. And then the unspoken step 3, check for simplest form. We know that 4/4 is not in simplest form because that's an improper fraction. The numerator and the denominator are the same. We also know that whenever the numerator and the denominator are the same, we mean 1 whole. So 1/4 plus 3/4 is 1 whole. Now let's try another one. 1/8 plus 5/8. Step 1, add the numerators as you normally would. 1 plus 5 is 6. Step 2, the denominator stays the same. And then the unspoken third step is check for simplest form. We know that 6/8 is not in simplest form because the numerator and the denominator are both even. So that means we need to find the greatest common factor. We can use basic facts to figure that out. And we are going to divide the numerator and the denominator, each by 2, which is the greatest common factor. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So that means 1/8 plus 5/8 is 3/4 in simplest form. Now one more. 3/100 plus 10/100. Step 1, add the numerators as you normally would. 3 plus 10 is 13. The denominator stays the same. Check for simplest form. We can tell that simplest form is, that 13/100 is in simplest form because 13 is prime, which means the only factors it has is 1 and 13, and 13 is not a factor of our denominator, so that means 13/100 is in simplest form. Okay, now that we've practiced adding like fractions, let's go ahead and look at example 1 in the book. So finger or pencil on example 1, and then read in your head as I read out loud. Danny walked 3/10 of a mile to the post office. Then he walked 5/100 of a mile to the grocery store. How far did he walk in all? Write the answer as a fraction with a denominator of 100 and as a decimal. We know in all tells us that we are adding. So that means we need to take 3/10 and add 5/100. Now you may be thinking, Ms. Fullis, those aren't like fractions. We can't add them. Well, that's correct. We cannot add them as they are right here. So what we have to do is we have to change one of these fractions so that they have the same denominator. The easiest one to change would be 3/10 so that it has a denominator of 100. We know how to make equivalent fractions. All we have to do is we take our original fraction, which is 3/10. We know that we're turning it into a fraction with a denominator of 100, and we figure out what we did to this denominator of 10 to get a denominator of 100, and then we do the same thing to the numerator. Well, we know that 10 times 10 is 100. I'm going to rewrite this a little bigger. I tried to go over top of the book, which is what you can do with your pencil, but I'm going to write it a little bigger. So we're starting with 3/10, and we want to get a fraction with a denominator of 100. We know that 10 times 10 equals 100. Whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator. So 3 times 10 equals 30. That means now we've changed 3/10 to 30/100. Well, now we can do that addition problem. We can add 3/100 plus 5/100 by just following the steps. Step 1, add the numerators as you normally would. Well, 30 plus 5 is 35. Step 2, the denominator stays the same. So we have 35/100. Now normally when we're adding fractions, we have that unspoken third step, which is to put it in simplest form. But because we're trying to do decimals, in this lesson, we're not going to simplify. So forget what you know about simplifying just for this lesson. That's not forever, just for today. Now we have 35/100. We know that 35/100 as a decimal, well, we have no wholes, so that means we have a 0 in the ones place. The decimal comes after the ones place, and the way we say decimals is we say the entire number that comes after the decimal, and then we say the place that the last digit is in. Well, since we're saying 35/100, that means that last digit has to come in the hundredths place. So we have a 3 in the tenths place, a 5 in the hundredths place, to make the decimal for 35/100. So that means Denny walked 35/100 or 35/100 of a mile in all. Okay, I just realized I forgot to show you with the models on example 1, but that's okay because example 2 shows us our models in an even better way. So we'll do it the same way we did in the first one, but then we'll look at models so that you can actually see how it's working. So finger or pencil on example 2 and read in your head while I read out loud. Find 4/10 plus 22/100. Write the sum as a fraction with a denominator of 100 and as a decimal. Well, we have no real world problem here, so we don't have to pull out the parts of our problem. We know that we're adding 4/10 plus 22/100. Well, we have the same situation as before. We have unlike fractions, which we cannot add as they appear. So, just like example 1, we're going to take 4/10 and write it as a fraction with a denominator of 100. Well, we know by looking at models that 4/10 is the same as what we would do is we would take our tenths grid and then a hundredths grid. We fill out 4 out of 10 for 4/10, and then we fill out the same amount of space on a hundredths grid. 4 columns of 10 is equal to 40 out of 100. So we know that 4/10 is the same as 40/100. We also know, because if we do it with multiplication, we start with 4/10. We know we want a fraction with a denominator of 100. We know to get from 10 to 100, we multiply by 10. Whatever we do to the denominator, we also do to the numerator. 4 times 10 equals 40. So either way, whether we use models or multiplication, we know that 4/10 is equal to 40/100. So now we can add our fractions the way we normally do. 40/100 and 22/100 are like fractions, so step 1, we are going to add the numerators as we normally would. 40 plus 22 is 62. The denominator stays the same. And remember, just for today, we're pretending we have no idea what simplest form is, so our answer is 62/100. What we can do, let's look at our hundredths grid right here. We know we started with 40, our first addend was 40/100, so we started with 40, and then we added 22. Well, we know to get 20, we just fill in 2 columns. 1, 2, each column has 10, 20 is 2 tens, and then we have that 2 in the ones place, so we are going to shade 2 extra little pieces. So here we have 40/100 that are shaded in, I think it's blue, can't really tell, I think it's blue, and then we went ahead and shaded in 22 out of 100. If we count these columns, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 full columns, and then we have 2 extra little ones. So that means we have 6 full columns, which is 60, and 2 extra, so that means we have 62, out of 100 shaded. We know 62 out of 100 as a fraction looks like a numerator of 62 and a denominator of 100. Now we have to figure out the decimal. Well, we know that there are 6 tenths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tenths, and then 2 hundredths. So we put a 0 in the ones place because we have no full grids. A decimal point comes after the ones place. We have 6 columns, so 6 tenths. And then we have 2 little extra pieces, so 2 hundredths, which looks like 62 hundredths. Now they checked using models, but we already used a model. So you can look over this. This is the way that we would check. We have 4 tenths, 22 hundredths. If we put them together on a hundredths grid, we have 62 shaded, which again looks like 62 hundredths as a fraction, and 62 hundredths as a decimal. Okay guys, let's go ahead and do the guided practice together. So the directions say write each sum as a fraction with a denominator of 100 and as a decimal. So that means you need 2 answers. If you have one answer, a fraction, or one answer, a decimal, that's not enough. You need a fraction and a decimal. So number 1 says 5 tenths plus 100. Well, we know that we can't add these fractions as they appear. So we need to change 1 so that they have the same denominator. Well, we're going to take the tenths and we're going to change it to a denominator of 100. So we're starting with 5 tenths. Let's do it to the side actually, because we might need that for something else. We might need that space. So let's go over here and we will find an equivalent fraction for 5 tenths with a denominator of 100. We know to get from 10 to 100, we multiply by 10. Whatever we do to the denominator, we do to the numerator. So 5 times 10 equals 50. So that means we are now adding 50 hundredths plus 100. Step 1, add the numerators as you normally would. 50 plus 1 is 51. And step 2, the denominator stays the same. 100. We're going to pretend we have no idea what simplest form means, but now we need to write this as a decimal. Well, we know 51 hundredths is the same as 51 out of 100. We have no holes. Let's put a comma there so we know. Then we have our decimal point. 51 has 5 tenths and 1 hundredth. So we have, as a fraction, we have a numerator of 51 and a denominator of 100. And then as a decimal, we have 51 hundredths for our answer. Now number 2, 7 tenths plus 13 hundredths. Well, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our fraction that has a denominator of 10, and we're going to turn it into a fraction with a denominator of 100. We know that 10 times 10 equals 100. Whatever you do to the denominator, you have to do to the numerator. 7 times 10 is 70. So our answer is 70 hundredths. Oops, not our answer, sorry. Our equivalent fraction is 70 hundredths. Now we have like fractions, so we can add them as we normally would. 70 plus 13 is 83. And our denominator stays the same. 83 hundredths means the same thing as 83 out of 100, which means we have no holes. We would have 8 tenths and 3 hundredths to make 83 hundredths. Okay, we're not going to do any of the independent practice together today because they're all in the same form as either the examples or the guided practice. But let's go ahead and look through so that I can tell you what to do. Let's see, number 3 and 4, you are doing it the same. You are doing it the exact same way as example 2 with the models. So you will shade the models. Make sure to do that. Numbers 5 through 12, you'll do the same way as the guided practice. Make sure, what I want you to do is everybody listen, because some people did not do this in past lessons, and your grade will show this. You need a separate sheet of paper. Everybody right now, get out a separate sheet of paper for numbers 5 through 12. you will show me how you got the equivalent fraction. You're going to take the fraction with a denominator of 10 and turn it into a fraction with a denominator of 100. So on your separate sheet of paper, you need to say number 5, 6/10 equals with a denominator of 100 and show how you got it. So this right here for numbers 5 through 12 need to be shown on a separate sheet of paper. Then on the back of the independent practice, number 13 through 15 are word problems. We are doing addition, so that means you do need the equation. So on that line, you need to show me the original equation with unlike fractions, the equation with like fractions. You need to show me the answer. Remember that we are not doing simplest form, so you need to show me that answer. Make sure that you have the units and then pay attention. Do you need to show it as a fraction or as a decimal or both? Do not forget the units. On your homework, a lot of people forgot units. You will be losing points for those. I let you know that you had to show the units. That first week I didn't count it, but once we got into the second week and last week, I am counting off if you do not have units. Do not forget that. That is something that we have done almost since the beginning of the year, so there's no excuse for forgetting to do it. You have to show the units. Number 16 and 17 are critical thinking, so those come from your brain. You need to be thinking about that. And then now look at the homework. Pay attention to this. This is where some of you, I think, stop the video, and then you miss out and you lose points. Numbers 1 through 4, you're doing just like the guided practice. Again, everybody listen. You need a separate sheet of paper, not the same one from your independent practice, because you're keeping that. That's to help you study for your homework. You need a separate sheet of paper for numbers, 1 through 4 to show how you got that equivalent fraction. Then on the line, make sure that you have your answer, your original answer, and then the decimal. Remember, no simplest form. For the word problems, you have to do it the same way as the independent practice. Show the original equation, the equation with the equivalent fraction, your answer as a fraction, and your answer as a decimal. Make sure that you have units. Do not forget the units, because this is where you will lose points. A lot of people were forgetting, and you're going to lose points on that. And then number 7 is a test practice, so that does not, you just need to look at it and figure out which equation is being shown with those models. Okay, do not forget your separate sheets of paper and to show your units. Also, some of you turned in your independent practice. Do not tear out your independent practice. Do not put it in your packets to give it back to me, because then you won't have it to study for your test, and that won't be good. Just like always, I do not want your independent practice. You keep that to study from. Now I know I can't check it to make sure that you're doing it, but if you're not doing it, well then you're in trouble for the test. So even though I'm not checking it, you still need to do it, because otherwise you won't know how to do it for your test. So do not tear out and turn in independent practice. Only homework and check my progresses. Okay, go ahead. If you have any questions about today's lesson, Skype me or FaceTime me between 1 and 5, and I'll help you out.